This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, it's Joe. Welcome to the MDG call. And today we are in for a Zack attack. George Zack is going to tell us about FDA's Call to Quality Voluntary Initiative. Is it voluntary? Is that the V?
Yes, Voluntary Improvement Program. Yep.
So we can blow all this off and not have any negative implication with FDA?
No.
That doesn't sound so voluntary then.
Well, we can certainly discuss all of it. So yep. Thanks, Joe. My name's George Zack. I am not with FDA. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the FDA's initiative today. That's a part of the Case for Quality that's called the Voluntary Improvement Program. I think like all the calls that Joe has hosted previously, this is really meant to be a conversation. So please feel free to interrupt, interject questions, ask for points of clarification. Let's just keep the conversation moving throughout. Joe, when you do get a chance, since you do have the power, if you could allow me. As I said, my name's George Zack. I'm not with FDA. I am part of a small consulting group called Two Harbors Consulting. You're going to hear me talk about a couple of different other groups that I'm not a part of today, including the FDA. I'm not a member of industry, so I'm not working for one of the big medical device manufacturers. And I'm not a part of the CMI Institute, but I've done work with all of those groups as a part of this particular initiative. Let me know, Joe, or anybody out there, if you can see. I'm showing you the Slack screen right now. Is that something that you guys can see?
I can.
Yep. Okay, great. So I didn't want to bore all of you today with another PowerPoint. Prior to the call, I put this in the Our Weekly Call thread in Slack. So I'm hoping that I can get through this entire thing by just showing you these resources. So you can go back if you're listening to this in the recording, or if you want to go back at any point in Slack, you want to go back to these particular attachments from the CMMI Institute. This is exactly the material that I'm using. I haven't made up any of these particular materials. They're all coming from the Institute themselves.
Okay.
Again, prior to this, go ahead.
You may have seen that our friend Arthur Brandwood, based out of Fiery, Australia, added something underneath that he had friend Vincente from FDA do a presentation with him on the very. He's, let's see, oh, there he is. There's CFQ lead. Do you know him, Francisco?
Yep. I've done several presentations with Francisco, or he typically goes by Cisco. On this particular program. Another thing that I point to, because there was a little bit of conversation in the Slack thread, is I've also pointed folks back to a few other, it's probably buried in here somewhere, a few other presentations that we've done through MDIC, the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, on this particular program. Prior to this, I was asking people, hey, do you have any questions you'd like to have answered? And Joe hit me with the, why should I care about this particular program? And I'm not going to play this video right now. This is about a 3.5-minute video from Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. I imagine most of you know who he is. He's the director of CDRH. And he put this video up about a handful of years ago about something called the Case for Quality. And it's definitely worth you going and listening to it. Basically, Dr. Shuren recognizes that while we've had the QSR in the books for coming up on over 25 years now, the compliance is not enough. He was seeing that while organizations may be compliant, they may not necessarily be delivering the quality product into the market, and vice versa. An organization may not be compliant and they may be delivering a quality product. And so that dissonance set forth this case for quality. They partnered with industry through a public-private partnership, an organization called the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. You'll hear me refer to them as MDIC. Now, the Case for Quality has several different initiatives in it. I'm only going to speak about one of their projects to date, which is this voluntary improvement program, but there are several others. So he doesn't speak, in this video, he doesn't speak specifically about this program that I'll describe today, in part because his video is well before this program took root, but there are a whole handful of initiatives that MDIC is currently managing. Some of you might be aware of some of the work related to CAPA, making quality a career. Those are other programs that we can discuss maybe in another call at some point in the future. I'm going to talk to you specifically about the voluntary improvement program. The why you should care is, I think it's important to recognize that under the leadership of Dr. Shuren and others at the agency has taken a pretty hard look at where they are with the QSR compliance and really what it takes to deliver quality products to the U.S. public. Certainly, I know we have representatives on this call from Europe or maybe other parts of the globe, but obviously the FDA is interested in the U.S. public. The difference between compliance and quality, I think probably all of you on this call get it, but the analogy that you'll hear me use over and over and over again with this, where it really hit me, is with my teenage children as they got their driver's licenses. In particular, my son, the day he got his driver's license, on that day he demonstrated he was a compliant driver. Now in his mind, he was a high quality driver as well, but all of us that have had a driver's license for some time recognize, looking back, probably when you got your license when you were 16 or 18 or whatever that was, you were certainly not a high quality driver at that point, as much as you might have believed it. And that really, I think when I say that to folks that are of our age, you certainly see the difference between compliance and quality. So with this program, and I'm going to bring up a different screen here, about 2.5 years ago, working with MDIC and the CMMI Institute and industry partners, we defined what was called the Medical Device Discovery Appraisal Program. Again, this resource is linked in the Slack thread, and you can get right to it yourself. And I'm going to go through this just for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then again interrupt at any point. But I'm then going to open up for conversation, and we can take it in whatever direction you'd like. So I've already described the problem here a little bit. FDA seeing that there's a difference between quality and compliance. I think you probably also have seen other initiatives from the FDA outside of this program, if those of you that are familiar with the Digital Health Initiative. And I think they're looking at a lot of the same problems and how to address that. In this program, MDIC specifically wanted to explore how maturity models could be used as a way to assess an organization's approach to quality. And there's a white paper out there where the CMMI model, the capability maturity model integrated, was selected as a maturity model to assess medical device organizations to determine where they were in their practices and their capabilities in approaching quality. In turn for participating in the program, and I'll describe some of the details of the program here in a moment, by way of these organizations undergoing a CMMI appraisal, these organizations then also got an adjustment to some of the typical regulatory activities. The first one that they receive is their typical routine inspection is waived. However, there are other regulatory benefits, and we'll talk a little bit about those as well. Okay, so the way this thing works is an organization would apply to the FDA through the CMMI Institute. They have to be an organization that has a good compliance profile, and there's a whole definition as to what that means. But in short, you can say that you're not currently dealing with a warning letter, you're not dealing with a consent decree. You have a good compliance standing. The CMMI processes that to the FDA. The FDA would accept or reject that particular application of that particular organization. Now, that's an important thing. For this particular program at this time, it's important to recognize that the organizations that are participating in this have already demonstrated that they are compliant, right? So we're not dealing with the non-compliant organizations in this program yet. There's another initiative underway that some of you may have heard about that we can discuss later about non-compliant organizations. But for this program, these are organizations that are compliant. This application process, as you can see there, it takes about 5 days from hitting the submit button in the website to the FDA approving or rejecting that particular application. Then within 60 days of the organization getting enrolled, the CMMI Institute works with the organization to determine an appropriate appraisal scope. So what does the organization do? For the most part, we've had class 3 medical device manufacturers acting in this particular program, but we've also had contract sterilizers, contract manufacturers, R&D shops, software shops. And so there is a planning, scheduling, scoping to outline what an appraisal would look like. There's a standard criteria for the initial appraisal of an organization. Those of you that might be familiar with the CMMI model, it's broken into practice areas. There's a standard 11 practice areas that all organizations would have as a part of the criteria of their initial appraisal. Those are, and this is a little bit of inside baseball, those of you that are also familiar with the model, those are, for the most part, to maturity level 2. There's some practice areas that are actually assessed to maturity level 3. Without getting too much into the nuts and bolts exactly of CMMI, obviously higher levels of maturity are demonstrating higher levels of capability from the organization. With this, the routine inspection benefit is granted to the facility, and then within 90 days of enrollment, the goal of it being 90 days within enrollment, an appraisal is executed at the site. That's over the course of a week. An appraisal team of at least 2 people with a CMMI certified lead appraiser and other appraisal team members. I think the largest appraisal team that's been sent out to a site has been 6 people. Appraisal team members are all certified in the model, so they're well trained, and then the organization actually gets the specific results indicating where they have strengths and opportunities and potentially weaknesses against the model. The CMMI then also gets those particular appraisal results back. So they have collected the appraisal results at this point from over 50 appraisals. I think it's across about 22 or 23 different organizations. So yes, some of our medical device manufacturers have enrolled multiple facilities. And then the FDA has provided an aggregate of those particular results. So the specific results from the appraisal are not shared back with the FDA. So if we are finding some sort of issue with configuration management, the specific text of those results are not shared back with the FDA. The FDA instead gets a high-level set of numeric scores indicating how the organization performed in the particular practice areas. With that, with completion of the appraisal, the organization gets some of these manufacturing submission benefits. So I'm going to pause here a little bit and back up. Some of these include, as you can see up here on the upper right, streamlined and accelerated site change submissions. So the typical 30-day engineering change notice, organizations are getting those processed in a faster time. I believe the FDA is averaging those within 5 days. The site change submission, some of you may also know this is the 180-day. Those are also fast-tracked. I don't have the exact time as to how quickly that's occurring. Obviously, that's a less frequent type of submission. The PMA inspection can be also waived as well. Every 90 days, the CMMI lead appraiser then follows back up with the organization in what we call a checkpoint to understand how the organization is processing the results from that CMMI appraisal and what they're doing to address those. Now, there's no specific obligation. This is not like the results from those particular appraisals. You're not, unlike a 483 or a warning letter, there's nothing binding that says you must address these in a certain amount of time. The organization chooses how they'd like to address them and the timeline in which they'd like to address them. Keep in mind, the organization has already demonstrated that they are compliant, and this is improvement information. They can choose to how they would like to deal with it and on which particular timeline. Additionally, the organization, this last box here, the organization has worked to define various quality metrics. These are typically in the areas of safety, effectiveness, reliability, and availability. And the organization sharing with the FDA through the CMMI Institute how those particular measures are shifting over time. And ideally, they would be tied to the performance, they would be tied to the improvement initiatives that had been potentially identified from a CMMI appraisal. Those checkpoints occur on a quarterly basis. And then, as you can see here in the last circle, there's an annual appraisal. So the organization engages in an appraisal again. This is pretty close to on an annual basis. It can vary plus or minus by a couple of weeks for whatever reason from a scheduling perspective. And the criteria of the appraisal can then shift based upon the capabilities of the organization and what's of value add to the organization. So we're not going back and necessarily assessing the organization against that same criteria year over year, particularly if the organization has demonstrated a strong level of capability in those particular areas to start. So I'm gonna pause there and just see.
Yeah, because I want to ask a quick question.
Yep, go ahead, Shan. Good.
The ETO situation where they've decided to fast track things through did they get their learning from this program that allows them to do that with companies now, or it just seems like it's similar to what's going on there?
No, the ETO initiative has been completely separate from this particular program, Jan. So
I know it's separate, but I meant the learnings they got from this on how it works well for companies. It seems like they're doing that kind of application to it. It just seems similar, not the same program, but the learnings from this program is being applied to the ETO stuff. It just seems like it to me from what you're saying.
Well, we have. I can't make a direct tie. I can't say that, hey, because of what FDA is learning in collaboration with industry by way of this program, they said, we want to go ahead and do something like that with contract sterilizers that are using ETO and try to determine ways that we can approach ETO sterilization differently. It does seem to me, Jan, that the agency is looking to be more collaborative with industry in trying to determine solutions like that. But I have no evidence from the FDA that says, hey, based upon what we did with the Voluntary Improvement Program or the Medical Device Discovery Appraisal Program, we wanted to leverage that sort of approach as well with contract sterilizers using ETO. That said, I think it's probably pretty clear to all of us the CDRH and FDA, maybe I can only maybe speak to my experience with CDRH. They are really looking to move the needle in a variety of different places, recognizing, be it machine learning or digital health or ETO or quality practices with device manufacturers. They are really looking to try to shift their thinking from my perspective. Does that answer your question, Jan?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Me next.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So perhaps you've answered it, and maybe I didn't quite get the answer, but as a marketer, as a strategist, I counsel my clients that everything that we work on is either urgent or it's not. Nothing that any of us do is a nice to have. It's a have to have, because we have, manufacturers have too many competing interests and the like, and they can just focus on so much at once. I haven't heard, George, anything that would make me shake a manufacturer by the shoulders and say, you're not listening, you have to participate in this. Is there an urgency here?
Only if you want to get your product on the market faster.
Well, I mean, but they may say the incremental time it will take me to learn how to do that, I could just keep doing it the same way I've been doing it. I would think. I mean,
it depends upon how many products you have, how big you want your company to be. I mean, if you're just making a device to sell to somebody else someday, that might not be a good way for you to go. But if you plan on having it established, I'm speaking for George, I'm sorry, but if you plan on having an established company that wants to get things on the market fast, stay out of trouble, actually make good quality products and cheaper, it's the way to go.
So say I'm a 1 or 2 product company. I mean, here again, I'm pushing the issue because in my case, especially, I tend to counsel a lot of smaller to mid-sized companies, and they might say, look, it's not like we have a pipeline full of product innovations and changes and things. It's pretty much business as usual. Every once in a while, maybe we have a submission a year or something like that. And, is there like a critical, like, hey, look, if you're doing 10 products a year and you're not doing this, this is how much you're wasting in time, money, resources, something. If it's 1, you can go either way. Is there kind of a point where, the lines cross on whatever axes you choose, George?
So a couple things here. One, I think you led the recording by asking, is this truly voluntary, or is this something that you have to do? It is truly voluntary. So, by the very nature of that, the criticality to do this, this is not a must do. I'm going to give you some business reasons here in a moment as to why I think it'd be really smart to do, regardless of the size of your organization or where you are in your product life cycle. But it is absolutely not a must. I have really been impressed by the attitude of the agency in not turning this into another compliance exercise. They have not taken the results from any one of these particular appraisals, even the aggregate form that they get of those, and said to any of the participating organizations, you must do something. They've not ascribed a particular score expectation. They've not ascribed a change in scores year over year. They've not expected a particular maturity level with the CMMI model from organizations participating, like that. Those of you that are familiar with the model and its use, like there is with certain defense subcontractors, they have been, pun intended, they've been pretty mature in working with the participating organizations to say, these are your results. You work to take what you've learned from these things and improve on them. So it's completely voluntary. Additionally, this program, we recognize may not necessarily be the right fit for every particular medical device manufacturer out there. I've talked to organizations who have said, hey, it's just not right for us at this time. We don't distribute enough products into the U.S. We're more concerned about MDSAP. We're really fighting this EU MDR thing right now. We just don't have the time to do
competition for
another.
attention and resources. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
really
so
what I'm getting at. Like, where does this fall in the priority list? It just sounds like a nice to have versus a have to have. MDR, you want to be in Europe? Have to have.
Yeah, I would suggest, so it's, it's really going to be dependent. This is, I think, part of a variety of offerings that the agency has out there, and you have to, from your own business perspective, determine what's going to work for you. But some of the data that the agency has shared back, for example, if you are struggling with 30-day change notices, say you're distributing both in Europe and you're distributing in the US. Prior to this, you would have to wait on that 30-day change notice from the FDA. So your ability to deploy that particular change to your engineering processes may be delayed. You could be looking at potentially 2 different manufacturing lines, one for Europe and one for the US. That's maybe shifted a little bit now with some of the MDR considerations anyway. But getting, there's a true cost and a cost of delay with deploying those particular changes. A site change submission as well. And again, maybe if you're a single site manufacturer and you're just dealing with one product and you're not necessarily concerned about that, maybe this particular submission thing doesn't, or the site change consideration is not something that impacts you. That said, we've had organizations, we've had the large players. You could probably imagine all the names that are participating in this. And we have organizations that are involved in this program that are as small as 17 people, with the company name being the same as for the people that happen to work there. So it does fit for small organizations and large organizations as well. Additionally, what the participants think, just from this particular flyer, you can see the percentages here. Organizations are finding that the feedback that they're getting from these particular appraisals are of significant value. They're not interfering with their consideration from a compliance perspective. They're truly getting value-add feedback, and they are also partnering with the agency in a more effective way and with other industry partners to consider how to approach quality on whole. Now, that's for some organizations, that's, to your point, Joe, that's all the reason to be a participant in it. For other organizations, because of their priority set, they've said, not today, maybe next year. It's just the nature of it. So.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that.
Okay, I'll pause again. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Larry.
Okay. The companies that are actually participating in, if I was to go to them and ask them if they've seen any tangible benefits from participating, what would they tell me?
So again, so the measure piece is always the challenging piece. Measuring quality is always the challenging piece, and there's variability from organization to organization. And there's also variability as to how willing organizations are, how their willingness as to how much to share with that. So just measuring without getting to the product implications. The routine inspection, that being waived. We've done some assessment as to what does a routine inspection cost an organization. There's a lot of variability in that data. I ran that particular survey. Some organizations have said that a routine inspection, and that's one without there being any sort of 483 or warning letter, Some organizations have said that a routine inspection costs them with people in the room working with FDA, downtime at the site, whatever it is. They've said it's cost them $10,000. We've had other organizations say it costs them as much as your typical routine inspection of 2 to 5 days by the FDA, as much as $500,000. So there's a lot of variability there, but the removal of that particular routine inspection is therefore somewhere between $10,000 and $500,000, depending upon how you consider that particular benefit. There is, if you go back to some of the resources that I pointed to from MDIC, Luann Pendy for Medtronic actually put up a slide for their the back room for their MDSAP audit. There were 70 people working in the back room for that particular audit. That's a pretty costly activity. Obviously, this does not remove your MDSAP activity, but these activities don't necessarily drive that level of backroom involvement. We're just asking people to describe the work that they do so that we can assess those particular capabilities. So we do this in a much lower cost fashion for those particular organizations. Additionally, in terms of some of the benefits ROI, we have seen getting these changes processed in a quicker fashion. Each organization will be able to determine as to what they see that cost of delay or overcoming that particular cost of delay is. One that I struggle with a little bit in terms of what the benefit is, Larry, is that we've heard from some organizations that engineers who previously would sit on an engineering change notice because they didn't want to deal with the paperwork, they didn't want to deal with the 30-day wait time. They're actually bringing changes to the table that they would not have previously brought. So I don't know exactly how you measure hey, I had an idea before and I just didn't bring it, and now I'm gonna bring it to the table. But that's an obvious consideration. There have been, there's also benefit to the FDA in terms of some cost benefit, but probably from the industry partner perspective, there's less caring about that. But we've seen that particular products have gotten to market faster, as Janice indicated, which has actually had impact on that product getting available to a certain number of patients, and then how that's been impactful to patients. We've had at least one organization say that the results that they got from the appraisal, the improvement opportunities that were identified, saved them $500,000 just in deploying the improvements associated with that. They were able to say XYZ improvements have turned into actual benefits for us that are close to $500,000. There's going to be some variability on that from organization to organization. That ties back really to this particular piece, is helping those organizations define that particular performance report as to how those are impacting from a product perspective. What I would really recommend, and I'm going to pop back, one second, I'm going to pop back to this Slack piece, is there's, so I'll bring it back up here after the call in our weekly call thread. The MDIC has actually run quarterly webinars. In those webinars, we bring back industry representatives to speak to their experience in the program and what benefits they've seen. So you can hear it from me as a consultant to say, hey, this is the program, this is the benefits. But when you go and you hear it from somebody from Medtronic, or you hear it from somebody from Boston Scientific, or you hear it from somebody from Baxter, they're speaking to their experiences in the program and the benefits they've individually received. You're going to, one, hear how that's truly a value add, and two, you're going to hear the variability from organization to organization as to how they've received those particular benefits. So it's both an answer and a non-answer to your question, I think, Larry.
Thank you.
Somebody else in there was going to ask something?
Yes. Yeah, I had a question. I was interested in hearing in a little more detail, if you can, on how this process impacted in propagation of engineering changes. I thought that was kind of intriguing because that's something I often have to go through with my customers. If you make this kind of a change, it's going to really result in a lot of more regulatory impact, but you could make this kind of a change and not do so. So the regulatory environment has a giant effect on the kinds of changes that we make. And so, yeah, I'm really interested in if you can give me a little more detail on how that works from their perspective.
So Larry, I think that, so I'm not prepared for this here right now. I'll do a couple things. One, I'll circle back to point you to the streamlined 30-day change notice form. And you can do the comparison to consider how that streamlined form, which allows you to bundle multiple changes, and the speed of it. I'll point you to that. That's a link that's publicly available for. But you can only use that form if you're participating in the program. I'll point you to that. And then in regards to, I'm not prepared here to speak to any one specific engineering change that an organization has brought forth and a specific benefit that they've accomplished out of that in terms of dollars. But I do have some of that information and I can follow back up on that as well. Again, there's variability on that from organization to organization. As well as some of their willingness to share some of that information, but I'll be happy to see what I can drum out for you on that.
And specifically, I'm not asking for any trade secrets or anything like that, or any technical details which would compromise any of their agreements in any way. I would even be satisfied with just the impressions of the engineers and associated people on the way that the process worked. I've been in on a bunch of this stuff and tons of changes, but I would be interested in their comparisons on how it used to work versus how it works under this program. That would be most interesting, and I don't need any trade secrets or details at all.
Sure. Yeah, I think that anecdote that I give of an engineer, we've heard from engineers specifically saying that they were reluctant to submit engineering change notices previously because of the regulatory overhead, the forms associated with that. And now that they are more willing to bring ideas forth because they can process those changes, one, it's a streamlined form, and two, those changes can get processed more quickly. You know, again, just the idea that they're bringing changes to the table to drive improvements into that organization from a quality perspective, that alone is a huge shift. Joe, I see you're saying hi in the chat.
Actually, that was intended for Luke, and I meant to just write it to him privately because he wrote you a question.
Oh, okay.
As quality is assessed according to metrics, does this mean there is a clear definition of quality, or are these metrics publicly available? And Luke was kind of writing me a little that I have been paying attention to every screen except his little chat window. So Luke, when we're on these, it's a lot more effective to reach me on Slack than this. There's just too many windows that I'm trying to track at once to keep the call moving smoothly. George, you're up. As quality is assessed according to metrics, does this mean there's a clear definition? Are they publicly available metrics?
This is a great, great question, Luke. And so you're going to definitely get the George opinion here on this. Okay, so it's really interesting to me because I think you can go to any medical device manufacturer and you ask them, how do you measure quality? You would probably get, if you went to 3 medical device manufacturers, you'd probably get 5 different answers as to how they measure quality. And so when we started this program, we asked those organizations that were participating, how is it that you go about measuring quality? I think I'm going to talk a little bit here about a key attribute of this program, which was, well, their answer was, well, how do you want me to measure quality? How does the agency expecting me to measure quality? What's the right answer here in terms of measuring quality? Those of you that have been involved with some of this conversation, some of you might remember that Xavier Health came out a few years ago with their own approach, proposing that how quality could be measured as a pre-production, production, and post-production consideration. Marla Phillips out of Xavier drove that particular effort. And even there, you would see that organizations took very different approaches to how they measure those particular aspects of quality. In a similar regard, even though we've driven organizations towards saying, can you tell us how you consider the measurement? And here's a whole bunch of ideas of how you could consider it. How do you measure the safety of your device, the effectiveness of your device, the reliability, the availability of your device? This is how other organizations have measured those particular things. We are still seeing that organizations measure those things in a variety of different ways. My opinion is that you often see when organizations start this, they're often measuring quality in a more typical compliance type of fashion, right? So you're more likely to see organizations measure, have a measure of quality related to, say something related to age of CAPAs or number of complaints. Now, I'm not saying that those particular measures are wrong, but it's probably not necessarily the whole view of quality to consider. And so by way of participating in this program, all these organizations have developed a community, maybe not dissimilar to what Joe has developed here with MDG, but there's an ongoing conversation between these participating organizations as to, hey, this is how, they hold up, this is how we measure quality in terms of first time yield, OTIF, supplier quality, and it's moving the entire conversation forward from a quality perspective. Again, the agency has not put forth a, hey, you must measure quality in this particular way. They're much more interested in understanding how does your organization measure quality and how are you moving on those particular measures? And based upon the results of your particular appraisal, how are you leveraging that information to then improve your outcomes of quality? Really, though, underneath all that, it's been there's been a fundamental shift in between the industry participants and the agency in developing a trust and having that conversation as to what those measures are, what the organization is willing to share, because as soon as you say, hey, start providing these measures to the agency, people get a little, they start getting concerned, right? And so, again, I have to compliment the agency that they've, the folks that have been participating in this from CDRH, they have not necessarily ascribed a specific set of measures that are expected or a specific set of results, but they're really in this information gathering mode to say, hey, how is your organization measuring quality and what are you doing with that particular data? So, Luke, I don't think you're on audio, but I don't know if you're getting any text back to Joe. Let me know if that's helping your question. Okay, we've had a couple other folks join. Okay, thanks. Any other comments or questions at this point? Go ahead, Rick.
I just had a defining question, and it's. I was trying to figure out how to more precisely ask the question that I was asking before, and what came to mind was I was inquiring about the. There's always an assumption when you're making an engineering change, especially functional safety, effectiveness, things like that, about why wasn't this change already in place? Why don't you know your process? Things like that. Those are big areas of scrutiny, and those are actually fairly large. Those are fairly large reasons why engineering changes don't go through. And so the key question is, how does the new process affect the threshold of where the FDA's level of critical scrutiny relative to the magnitude of the change proposed? There's usually a threshold where the FDA will say, okay, you shouldn't be making this change. This should have been in your original design. Don't you know what you're doing?
Yeah, so button that up. Give me what's your question with that? What's the FDA's threshold for considering an engineering change notice?
Yes. In terms of this is a fairly significant improvement. Why didn't you include it in your original submission? Did you just think of this, or were you trying to hurry something through while it was still in development? I think back to the process development changes, which going back a number of years were like you could almost develop your process while in validation, but the rules of course changed very much. You really have to know and have your process completely defined before going into validation. I'm thinking about that kind of thing. Not in terms of validation, but in terms of design changes.
Yeah, and so my role, Rick, is I've been more involved specifically in executing the appraisals. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the FDA. I know there have been some of these streamlined change notices put forward by organizations where due to the nature of them, the FDA has taken that and they said, okay, look, we need to have another conversation on this. And they might be for those particular reasons that you're mentioning. It might be like, hey, why was this not considered before? Hey, this is a broader scope change that we need to consider. Hey, it's a combination product, so we have to also bring in our brothers and sisters at Cedar. But again, it's improving the relationship between the organization and FDA to help move that change along, or at least to have a conversation about it. But I couldn't speak to the agency specifically saying, hey, this is the threshold at which this is not a change that you can do in this particular streamlined form versus this one is, all these are below that, and hence you can do that. I know there's been obviously successes that have been claimed from the participating organizations by way of those that streamlined approach. And you've certainly asked a couple questions on it, so I have the homework assignment to circle back to maybe provide some examples on that.
Sounds good. Thanks, George.
You bet.
George, I have to congratulate you. You have weathered 30 minutes of question after question after question, which A, says, you know what you're talking about, and B, that this is really interesting and there's a lot of questions about it. So thank you on behalf of the group for educating us on such a relevant topic.
Well, Joe, thanks for the opportunity to speak to it here. I think we've only really scratched the surface. I would strongly encourage, as a follow-up, folks can hit these resources that I've pointed to in the Slack channel. This first attachment is exactly what I was pointing to. This is just a 4-page marketing slick essentially that was put together. That's the high-level overview of the program that I presented from. The other one that I point to is, as you can see, is a 44-page white paper that was written by the FDA. There's not a date on this, but I believe this came out in late September. This is a
boring. Sorry.
No. Well, okay. For those of you that have an attention span greater than 4 pages, then, and I'll let you determine who that is. And I'm not being interrupted by your dog. You're not being interrupted by a dog. This is all the time. Right. I mean, come on. We're regulatory people. We read this stuff all the time. Okay, yep. We read this sort of stuff. This is, I find this is this is a very palatable read. This should drill into that next level of detail. So consider that.
This is why you people are so important to me. So I never have to read this shit.
Additionally, I will repost into the Slack channel the MDICX webinars. So those webinars, those case for quality forms are great because you'll hear from the CMI Institute, you'll hear from Cisco Vicente from FDA, and you will hear from industry partners speaking to their experience in the program. Those are our webinars that have occurred on the quarter. If you're like me, you can crank those up to 1.5 or 1.7 speed to listen back to those. And hear those particular presentations. And then please feel free to reach out to me in the Slack channel and ask any additional follow-up questions that you have regarding the program.
So George, let me give you an opportunity to follow up. To pitch your services. You've educated us. Why would we give you money? How can you help us?
Well, to be clear, you are not directly giving me money by participating in this program. These organizations, when they enroll in the program, they are there's a fee for the CMMI appraisal that is going to that fee is something that is levied by the CMMI Institute. By executing an appraisal, of which I'm an appraisal team member, I would be paid for those particular services. Just to be very clear as to what
kind of FDA.
Sure, not of FDA, of the CMMI Institute. Okay. So and going and executing those particular appraisals. I am not, by speaking to this program, I'm not saying, hey, have your company contact me to go and execute a CMMI appraisal. In fact, I would say if you have a company that's interested, I would point them to, consider going to the CMMI Institute website, cmmiinstitute.com medical device, and to get that additional information by clicking on, going to this particular email address, medicaldevice@cmmiinstitute.com. They would engage with the CMMI Institute.
How many folks are you on that team?
So a CMMI appraisal team can be anywhere from a minimum of 2 people to, as I said, the largest appraisal team that we've had has been 6. And that really depends on.
Let me rephrase. If I write medical device at CMMI Institute and I need that service, how many humans are on the team that might get a call and say, hey, there's this guy who needs help? Am I guaranteed to put money in your pocket if I email, or are you like one of 10 people who might get tapped for the job?
No, so Juan, that email doesn't go to that email doesn't go to me. That email is going to a staff at the CMMI Institute. We currently have I think there's so a little bit about the CMMI appraisal teams. There's, I think, about 20 CMMI lead appraisers that are leading appraisals in the program.
Of which you are one?
I am not a CMMI lead appraiser, but I am an appraisal team member. Hopefully, at some point in the future, I will be a lead appraiser. It's a distinction in terms of the certification credential.
Can we do a write-in campaign, we here on the call? Say, hey, buddy George is awesome. I can't believe he's not a lead appraiser yet. What is your problem,
The Institute would not be swayed. There's all sorts of other, tests and class and observation activity that I need to go through to become a CMMI lead appraiser. It's a little different than being like a lead auditor, but you can think of it as a similar type path.
You have my vote.
Thank you.
Irrelevant.
Thankfully, it's not done by voting, but we don't need to turn this into a voting conversation.
Yes. Okay.
But appraisal team members are all, so the lead appraiser is is necessary, but there's also a training and a certification path to be an appraisal team member. Appraisal team members, I think that are currently enrolled in the program. That's probably closer to 50 possible people. The CMMI Institute essentially serves as that air traffic control to line up an organization that's participating with the program with the CMMI lead appraiser and an appraisal team. And so, if Joe Medical Devices started in the program tomorrow, that doesn't necessarily mean that I would be on that particular appraisal. The CMI Institute is driving, facilitating who the appraisal team would be for that particular organization. Does that answer your question, Joe? Okay, we have like 3 minutes, and I know Joe says he has a dental activity to consider right after this.
We have a little
Hopefully this is
time.
less
You don't have
painful
to.
than that.
We're not all going to Joe's dentist. You can continue. We have some time.
Okay, I'm happy to continue. This has been great so far. With, as I said, I wanted this to be conversational. Other broad or specific questions?
I had to jump on a little late, so you might have already covered this. I have heard rumors that supposedly this program is appropriate regardless of the stage of company. Most of my clients are between a guy in a garage and 10 guys in a garage. When does this make sense for somebody to pursue in terms of the size of the business, type of product, maybe type of inspections they have to consider?
Sure. So we did cover that a little bit before you jumped on, Michelle. We have, there's 2 parts to that I would say. One, we have most of the large medical device manufacturers that you're probably aware of are participating in the program. But we also have, I think the smallest organization that we've dealt with thus far is 17 staff, 4 of which have the same last name as the name of the company. So we've definitely dealt with small organizations as well. We talked a little bit about that. In considering that, the organization probably needs to consider what's best for them from an investment perspective as to where they are in the life cycle. But we've definitely dealt with small organizations, large organizations. However, it is necessary that the organization does have some sort of compliance profile. So if you and I started a medical device organization in our garage tomorrow and we had 0 compliance profile, we would likely be deemed ineligible for the program. You need to have some sort of compliance history. So it's for the 0 compliance history organization starting up as no startup, as a startup, they would not necessarily be eligible for this particular program, or at least they could still have a CMI appraisal, but they would not necessarily be eligible for the benefits that the FDA is offering.
But that's very interesting to me, because a lot of my clients, some of them get inspected, regularly. Some of them never been inspected, years and years.
Sure.
So it sounds like it could be hit or miss for a smaller company as far as the value here, or if they'd even be eligible.
Yeah, so I think if for the smaller organization that has a compliance profile and is distributing product into the U.S. and wants to become involved in defining what initiatives like this look like in the future. I mean, the organization that's 17 people, I've talked to those folks and they've said, look, we're not looking to get a site transfer benefit. There's no site transfer benefit for them. They have 1 location, right? They're interested in the engineering change notice, but for the most part, they're manufacturing a class 2 device, so that's not necessarily something that really is impactful to them. From their perspective, their involvement in the program is it's of interest to them because they get to participate with the other medical device manufacturers. They have as much voice at the table in defining what the future of this program looks like as the large medical device manufacturer, and they're also actively involved in helping shape the conversation for what additional future regulatory benefits would look like. So all these organizations that are participating get to also serve in a variety of working groups that are facilitated by the MDIC and the CMI Institute to define additional regulatory benefits, define what future appraisals look like. Many of these organizations are defining what a possible program like this would look like in the EU. Obviously, we wouldn't be working with the FDA in that way, but approaching an MHRA or a HIPAA type organization, they see the benefit in, okay, great, we would not have routine inspections. To your point, that's been a bit of a roll of the dice for a lot of organizations anyway, but they really see the value in addition to the identification of improvement opportunities that are coming back to them by way of the CMI appraisal as being able to participate in that community, be collaborative with the FDA, and to help shape programs like this, similar to this, like this in the future. Does that, Michelle, any thoughts on that? Good. Other questions?
I have a question. Who is that guy with the beard and the chocolate lab who joined the phone call? Can he put on his microphone?
Hello, everyone. Hi. Minnie, the lab, has gone away because she wasn't allowed to participate in the call. My name is Ed Capobianca. I've known Joe for quite a long time. I've already apologized to him about my beard, which is just
Apparently
a temporary
the last
seasonal
of the
thing.
Christmas decorations to come down, he said.
Exactly. So I'm CEO of a small urology device company called Ingenian Medical, and I'm also involved with a biotech company. I'm actually going to be over in the States next week. I'm based in the UK, but I'm going to be in the States next week around the JP Morgan conference. If anybody else is going to be there, it'd be great to see. I've just literally joined into the MDG premium group, but I've known and worked with Joe many times and really excited to be part of the group here.
What he's not saying is that Ed and I were castmates in the Wharton Follies production in 1991, and just ask him to see his actor reel. That's all I got to say about that.
Ed, are you coming to the London event?
He is.
I am, and I'm going to be doing one of the fast rounds with Joe on stage, so really looking forward to that as well.
Michelle's got her own speaking section. She's got fans and groupies coming. Ticket sales are going through the roof.
I think, what, 4? I got 4 whole ticket sales that are my own.
I'm not sure, but we can look later. By the way, tomorrow is the last day to buy San Diego 10X tickets before I raise the price to the standard price. So today is the last early bird day if you are thinking about coming to San Diego. No price breaks for London. It's already just enough to help me cover food and beverage. But if you can make it out, please do. Okay, that was our little Ed interstitial. Hello, Andre.
Hey,
Mr.
how are you?
Domino
Sorry.
found himself in a little bit of recent press. Want to tell us about the press release about you?
Yeah, I was just confirming the fact that we were very pleased and applauded the final ending of the medical device tax. So that was part of the omnibus spending bill. It was signed by Trump on December 27th, so a little bit late of a Christmas gift, but that's finally off our backs. And as I explained to Joe, we've already seen some clients that were holding back have come back to us now a little more confident, and we've seen some nice upswing for the coming year.
And that's an understatement. If I recall last week when we were talking before the actual call started, was it 2 weeks ago now? You said that you used to go months without a contract, and you have 4.
Yeah, well, no, I think
when?
what I told you was we typically in the past year we're getting 1 quotation per month, and within 3 or 4 days of the signing, we got 4 quotations in. So that's big for us.
It's an incredible story that I wish I had beforehand, because, you know, having, I won't say be the face, but for the no 2.3 thing, and I got a not insignificant amount of backlash from some detractors. They were like, yeah, this is all nonsense, and all the savings are going to
Absolutely
bigger
not.
bonuses and stock buybacks and pay your fair share and blah, blah, blah. And your story
Incorrect.
says, no, they really, really stopped
Absolutely.
developing until they knew this was gone. Not just delayed until later, not kicking the can down the road, but gone.
Absolutely. Well, you know, even though they suspended it twice, like I said, my quote to the press was, it was still hanging like a sword of Damocles over our industry. And until it was permanently gone, it could have been reinstituted at any time. And of course, being a 2.3% excise tax, people say, well, gee, that was so small. Well, that was whether you were profitable or not. So therefore, for small entrepreneurial companies, that was something you had to pay whether or not you had success there or not.
Well, I want to thank you for, if for no other reason, that you brought Greek lore into today's call. So thank you for that.
Okay, great.
George, back to you. I don't know if you can top any of this, but
Well, again, I think I've just really scratched the surface, and frankly, I can already I'm already dreading hearing the playback and hearing
why?
myself, or it's just that entire we all remember answering machines, right? When you heard your own voice on the answering machine, frankly, I think just there's a whole additional set of information here that we probably really didn't get into, but I would really encourage each of you to dig into the report that I've shared. I'll also put up the pointer to some of those additional webinars that I talked about, and please feel free to reach out with any questions. I'd be happy to speak to any of you individually, any of the organizations that you're dealing with individually, if you want to have an informal call with them as well about the program. I'd be happy to follow up with any of them as well. So you can keep the conversation moving with the MDG Premium Slack channel. I'd be happy to continue to move forward with it there.
As a public service in the GoToMeeting chat box, I shared an article called "I Am Ugly and So Are You," featuring an extremely unattractive picture of me. And I bring this up because no one likes the sound of their voice or the way they look on camera. And as I note, I'm not aware of anyone not doing business with me because I am balding, have a blemish, or sound like shit. So get over it, nobody cares. And you sounded just fine. Let's hear it for the way George sounded today. We validate you, George.
Oh, great. That's process validation for you right there.
There you go. That's what the whole thing is about.
Thank you for the PQ.
Does anyone want to add anything before we conclude today's call? How about a tidbit of knowledge that, wow, I didn't know that you know? Anything will do. How about you, Michelle? You've been doing a lot of 14971 and MDR stuff. Any new discoveries to share?
Yep. My next soapbox I'm going to get on is going to involve state of art and standard of care. State of art was finally defined in 14971, 2019, that was published at the end of the year. And it's talked about over 11 times in the MDR. And it's a huge part of the MedDev 2.7.1 Rev 4 for clinical evaluations. That's kind of the crux of everything that companies have to prove about their device is in context of state of the art and standard of care. And what does that mean in terms of the way it was recently defined in the regulations?
Okay.
Coming soon to a London event near you.
On behalf of our future guests, we look forward to it. Does anyone else have something to share? Okay. Well, I had fun.
Joe, thanks again for the platform. Thank you, everybody, for participating by way of a conversation today, and really appreciate the opportunity.
A week from tomorrow, Dr. Ron Leopold will talk to us about bringing telehealth to employee benefit programs. And then 2 weeks from today, at 1 o'clock in the morning, my time, Jan is going to talk about whatever the hell it is he does. And I think that's followed by Andre the following week by whatever the hell he does. Jan, what are you going to talk to us about?
Digital transformation.
I don't even know really what that means, but okay. Andre, what are you going to talk to us about?
Whatever the hell I do.
I'll settle for that. Ed, Rick, anyone who hasn't had a chance yet to speak, just let me know when you'd like your week to be. In the meanwhile, on behalf of Joe, Hage, and Elliot, I wish you a great day. And you know where to find me. I'll be here.
Ciao.
Oh, by the way, here's another thing, one last thing. And that is that if you haven't seen, I now have the privilege of doing LinkedIn live sessions. So if any of you want to do like a one-to-one conversation, kind of like this, and pick up whomever happens to be online who's connected to me at the time, let me know. Talk soon.
All right.
Do you want me to
Okay.
stay on? Joe, do you want me to
Thanks
stay
all.
on?
No, we'll do a separate call.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye. George, thanks.